Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. My name's Nader. In this video, we're going to go over the this keyword together in JavaScript. This keyword, no pun intended, is actually one of the keywords that actually just kind of makes every developer, especially the ones who are newer to web development, frankly, just quite sad. It's ultra confusing, and the amount of ways that it can be used just kind of boggles the mind. And even today, as using JavaScript for quite a while, sometimes I still get confused and forget what actually is happening with this keyword. I'm going to try not to be too punny in this video because there's just so many fun things we can do when the keyword that we're studying is literally this. But let's try to have some fun with this as we're going with it. And I'm going to try not to laugh every time I say that. But really, it's an important keyword for us to really conceptualize, because when we get to object-oriented programming in JavaScript next with classes and kind of how the prototypical inheritance actually works with classes, this is going to be a really important keyword for us to actually really make use of, so that we can leverage the power of classes and OOP in general. So let's just get right to it together. Okay, so to start, what is this all about? So to really understand the this keyword, we kind of have to think about it in the context of these really kind of big four ideas. So the first one is just objects, which we've seen before, right? So we can have an object that have different properties, so keys and values. We can have functions. Functions are up until now not too remarkable, right? They can do some input, they do some output, they can do some functionality that we can reuse in different places. We're going to use these in a new way in the context of this specifically. We need to understand the concept of scope as well. We went a little bit over this when we looked at closures together, and we saw how scope really works with things like variables and upper scopes and in lower scopes. And this is going to be a very important concept for this keyword. And then finally, classes, which we're not going to get into this video, but it's going to be the subsequent video after this one and the exercises, where we're really going to start seeing the power of this keyword and how it enables us to really build kind of more object-oriented types of language. Okay, so let's get started. So over here, on the left-hand side of the screen, I have two regular objects, right? Plain old JavaScript objects. So let's just go through them real quick. I have Thor, right? So the variable Thor is pointing at an object. The only property in this object has a key of name and a value of the string Thor. Okay, pretty simple. Same with Jade down here, right? So this is another variable pointing to an object that has a different name, in this case of Jade as a string. Okay, so what can we do with this, right? Well, we can create a function, and I'm going to lead up to slowly understanding how this keyword is valuable to us as we go through these next couple slides together. So just bear with me as we go through these. In this case, we have a variable called greet, and it's pointing to an arrow function. Now, I'm going to mention this towards the end of the video, but arrow functions are not usually to be used with this keyword. I'm just doing this here because this is what we've seen so far, and this is the most common type of function that we usually see in JavaScript, unless we really need to leverage this keyword. So just keep that at the back of your mind as we go through these examples together. So for now, we'll just stick with the arrow function, and then we can see later how that might get us into trouble. So in this case, we have a function that takes a single parameter, or has a single parameter, takes a single argument, and we're going to call that parameter hero. And all it's going to do, I split this up into several lines, but all this is going to do is console log out a name property on that hero, assuming it's an object, and it's just going to say like that object says hello, right? So if I call my greet function and I give it the Thor object, which is this one on the left, right, we would expect it to say Thor says hello, right? So we've seen this with objects, we've seen this with functions, nothing really too new and exciting here if you've seen this before. Same thing with Jade, right? We pass it Jade. Because this is a reusable function, we can pass it different objects, and as long as that object has a name property on it, it's going to work just fine. Okay, so that is just a regular function with regular objects, and we can kind of log out these things. Now, let's take a look at how we can actually kind of do this differently. Now, inside of Thor, for example, we could do it like this, right? We could actually have Thor have a name property, but also have a greet property. And again, I mentioned that arrow functions generally are not used when we're talking about the this keyword, but just bear with me for now and we'll see where that gets us kind of into hairy situations later on. So let's say that this greet function, it doesn't take any arguments, right? So there's nothing in the parameter list, and all it does is console.log out, but in this case, it's logging out Thor.name, right? So if you think of this compared to this previous example, we have a generic thing here where it takes hero and then we pass in the hero as an argument. But over here, since it's a method on this object, what we have to do is we want it to refer to Thor. So we're going to put Thor directly in here, which is the variable that's pointing at this object. So we're going to grab the name property off of it and we're going to say says hello. Right? So hopefully just this part kind of makes sense. If you read through it, hopefully you're kind of like, okay, I kind of see what's happening over there, right? This is kind of wonky because inside of here, we have something that's referring outside of here. So how does that kind of work? That's kind of odd, but it seems like it's going to work just fine somehow, right? And that's okay. So let's keep going with this. I'm really building up to kind of why we need the this keyword here. We're getting pretty close. So here, let's say we have the same thing. We have Jade, right? And we have a name of Jade here and then a greet, but this time we have a Jade.name inside the greet function instead of Thor.name, right? So that's really the only difference apart from the name being different. So this Jade.name here is referring to Jade object out here, which is what we're pointing to with this variable. Okay, so what's cool about this, right, is that instead of just having this function greet, we can actually kind of, it's a bit more ergonomic, right, for us as developers. We can do like Thor.greet. That just feels nicer, right? This kind of reads a little bit better, like Thor is greeting us, right, or Jade is greeting us, right? So in this case, we would see Thor says hello, and in this case, we'd see Jade says hello. So it seems to work the same as this function over here. But if you look at this, I'd like you to think, like, what is kind of an issue with this? So if you looked at this, you probably are like, okay, well, you know, this works, right? But there's some duplication here, and this is uncomfortable. The duplication is definitely quite uncomfortable because like this is basically the same code, right? So why not just make it a function like we had over here and then just write it one time, right? Well, the tricky thing is, well, in order to write it one time, we have to do this weird thing here where we have to pass in the hero, right? So we can't really do Thor.greet like this if we don't have it inside the Thor object, because we need to refer to Thor here in this case. So we need to know that Thor exists in this case, or that Jade exists to refer to their name, right? So if you stare at this for a little while, you'll kind of see why we can't really do the .greet in any other way. We need access to this object. So this is where this keyword comes in, at least to start. And we can use this in many other ways as well, but this is one of the important ways to look at this. So let's look at a prototype. So we looked at this in the previous video where we actually learned about the prototypes and prototypal inheritance, but let's look at this again. So over here, we have the same two objects that I had at the very start, the simpler versions of themselves. So just Thor with a name of Thor and Jade with a name of Jade. Very simple JavaScript objects, nothing fancy there. But check this out. This is really, really awesome. Probably should have highlighted the this keyword here, but we know that Thor and Jade in this case, right? These two objects on the left-hand side are both objects, right? You're probably thinking like, of course, Nader, they're objects. You literally told us that like 100 times. But we know that objects have a prototype. And we know that if we try to access something on an object that's not on the actual object itself that we created, it's going to actually look into the prototype, right? So what we can do is we can leverage this information and add the greet function to the prototype of object. Okay, so check this out. We can say object.prototype.greet is a function. Now this is where things start to differ slightly from before. We can't use an arrow function here. We have to use the function syntax itself. And again, we'll get into this in a future slide here in the same video, as well as in future videos as we look at classes. But keep in mind when you're talking about this and we're gonna really see why this is important in a second. Man, it's so hard to say this without laughing in this video. Oh my goodness, there I go again. But we have to use a regular function. We can't use an arrow function in this context, okay? But what this allows us to do is if we have a function like this, we can actually say console.log in here, and instead of trying to refer to Thor or Jade, right, we can refer to this.name. So what on earth is that, right? Well, what ends up happening in this case is when we are using Thor.greet, greet is on the prototype of Thor, right? It's not on Thor. There's no greet on here, right? We had greet on here before, which is what we're trying to avoid because this is duplicated code. We want to just make it so we can write this one time, right? So in this case, this value is going to equal to the thing on the left of the dot operator, okay? And we're going to see ample examples of this in a second, but in this case, it's going to be Thor. So this is literally going to equal to the Thor object when we call it like this. Okay, and the same thing goes for Jade. When we call Jade.greet, this is actually going to bind, is what it's called, to the Jade object. Okay, so this allows us to make something dynamic and reusable where we don't actually know what this is, right? Because it's dynamic. It changes when we run the code. We can create many different objects with different names, and then we can call .greet, and as long as it has a name property on it, this is going to bind over there. Okay, so this is definitely one useful case for using this keyword. Now, I do want to kind of go through this in code really quick before we actually go deep into how this context and everything behind this works. So I'm going to pull up Visual Studio Code here. I'm going to create a new file, and I'm just going to call this, let's just say prototype .js for now. Even though we're not really doing prototypes here, let's just go with that. Cool. So what I want to do is I want to do the same thing here, right? I want to create a object.prototype. Let me zoom in a little bit more here just so we can see this as I code without my terminal open. And I want to say .greet, and this is equal to a function. Okay. So inside the greet function, what I'm going to say is I'm going to console.log out, and I'll do the same thing here. Says hello there, right? Let's just go with that. And in here, if I'm using the function keyword, what I can do is I can try to access this property. So I can say this.name, for example. Now, name, of course, doesn't exist on object by default, but maybe if we give it a name in another object, it'll actually work. So let's see how this works. Let's just create our, let's go with my name, for example. We'll say Nader, and I'll say my name is Nader, just to switch it up from the example a little bit, right? So try your name when you're coding this out just for fun. What we can do is this. We can say Nader.greet, right? So let's run this and see what happens. Pull up my terminal here. Let me zoom out a little bit of the code just so that you can see this all in one place. I'm going to run node, and I'm going to run prototype.js. And what we can see is that we get the Nader says hello. Okay, so just to make this super extra clear, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back up to this greet function, and I'm also just going to console.log, not the constructor, this value itself. So what I want to see is what is this, right? And then what is this .name right after it. So if I run this one more time, what we'll see is that this is actually just this object right here, right? I can never stop laughing when I say that. I don't know why. It's just hilarious. So literally what's happening is this variable Nader in this case, right, which is pointing to this object, is going to equal this inside of this function. Okay, and if it has a name property, then it's going to work just fine. But what if it doesn't have a name property, right? Like let's go with Thor again, and let's just say that we misspelled name. So let's just say we put like 2 E's, name me or something, right? And we said Thor, right? And I tried to do Thor.greet. right? I'd like you to think, what is going to happen based on what you just saw about what the this ends up being, which is the thing on the left-hand side of the dot, right? What do you think is going to be logged out? All right, let's take a look. So we're going to get undefined, right? Because this value is Thor, or sorry, namey of Thor, right? In the case of Thor, and there is no name on this, right? There's no name because we spelled it wrong. We spelled it with an extra e by accident, right? So that makes sense, right? Because we're literally trying to access something on this object right here that doesn't exist. That key doesn't exist. So of course we're going to get undefined. Every time we try to access something on an object that doesn't exist, it's going to be undefined. Okay, now before we keep going with this, I do want to mention that adding things to the built-in prototypes like this, like object and array and things like that, is not best practice. I would not advise you to do things on the prototype like this. This is mainly for demonstrative purposes. We're going to use a new tool later on in this video and in subsequent videos when we look at classes to actually create our own objects that are not objects directly from the object prototype, and then we can add our functionality onto those. Because the reason for this is that this is technically now available to every single object in JavaScript, which turns out is pretty much everything. So that's a little bit dangerous. We can also accidentally overwrite existing things on some of these objects, and it's going to break the functionality of other things inside of our code. So we didn't go over this too much in the prototype video, but now that you've seen this method, imagine what we did if we said array.prototype.map is equal to something else, right? Instead of the regular map function. Then everything that tries to use map inside of JavaScript, including third-party libraries, is going to break because we've changed what the map function does. So don't add things to the base prototypes. It's usually bad practice, and you can end up really messing things up like this. And we will add them to our own custom types so that we don't break existing functionality. All right, let's keep going. Now, the next part that we're going to go through is really where the this keyword starts to shine. This was mainly just an introduction for us to see how we can actually refer to something that we don't have access to at the time of creation, which is definitely one of the main parts of using the this keyword. But the other main part is actually the binding and context part of the this keyword, which is where most of the actual confusion when using the this keyword actually comes from. So let's take a look at that next. Okay, so let's go through this since this looks a little bit gnarly at the start. I have an object right here. Okay, so let's just look at this part for now. Okay, ignore the thing on the bottom and all the lines. I'm creating an object, and this object is called Alex. Okay, Alex is an object that has a name property and a greet property. The name property is just a string Alex, right? That's fine. That's the name of our Alex object. And then the greet property is a function. And again, we can't use arrow functions here because arrow functions don't actually bind to the this value, which we'll see later. So we create a regular function, and all this function does is console.log out this.name says hi. So this is pretty much the same thing, if you think about it, as this function right here. Okay, instead of adding it to a prototype, what we're doing in this case is we're adding it to as a method on an existing object. Okay, so what is going to happen here is that when we actually try to use this greet function, different things can kind of take place behind the scenes. So the most obvious way to use this function is like so, right down here, right? We would probably want to do something like alex.greet, just like we saw thor.greet and natter.greet, but we were using the prototype. In this case, we're not using the prototype. We're actually using a key or a method directly on the object itself with this function keyword. So if I say alex.greet, what is happening behind the scenes is this keyword is being bound to this function with whatever was to the left of the dot. Okay, so I'm going to say that one more time since it's so important. In this specific call right here, when we say alex.greet, since this greet is a function keyword, it can actually bind this argument. So Alex ends up being and becoming the this for this greet function because it's the thing directly to the left of the call for that function, right? So we can think of this Alex turning into the context for the this within this box right here, which I've diagrammed out in gray. All right, so this is probably the visual you want to have at the back of your head when you're trying to think of what is the this value going to be inside of the context of an object like this. The most confusing thing comes when we try to think of this context changing depending on, for example, a lot of, when I first started, I thought that it was like this whole thing, for example. Right? And we'll see that in this case, it kind of is because we're using Alex, but we can also make it not, right? So the most important thing is to think about it in the context of what is to the left of the dot, calling this method, and that's going to bind to the this keyword inside of that method's function call. So in this case, we would get Alex says hi. Okay, so let's try this code out. I'm going to go back to VS Code. I'll just call this, I'll just call it alex.js since I'm going to copy the same code over there. I'm going to say, what did I have? I had const alex is equal to, and then we have our name, make sure I type this correctly, and our name of Alex. And then we have a greet, and greet, we cannot use an arrow function, right? And I'll show you what happens in a second if we do. This is going to be a regular function. I'm going to say console.log, and I'm going to say this dot name. This is the new keyword that we're learning in this video, right? The this keyword says hi. Okay. Now, immediately before I even write out the alex.greet, when we're looking at these lines right here, this function, line 3, 4, and 5, or lines 3, 4, and 5, we don't actually know what this is yet. All right. Like, intuitively, you would say, oh, this must be name, right? So it's grabbing this name right here, but it's not. It could be actually anything, which we'll see later, right? The this keyword is dynamic. The only thing we can be certain of is that it's going to be scoped to this function keyword right here, right? So it only kind of exists over here inside where I have highlighted. So we can't say with certainty that this is actually anything until we actually try to call this greet function using the method call. So now if I actually call it and I say alex.greet like this, what I'm saying is please take the Alex and use it as the this for this greet function. Okay, so let me try this and I'm going to run node alex.js and you'll see that we get Alex says hi. Okay. I want to show you that this is going to break if we try to use an arrow function. So I'll just say arrow greet, for example, just because I can't come up with a different name, arrow greet. And I'm going to just copy this code right here. Okay. And I'm going to say alex.arrowGreet. Right? I'm going to run this. And what we'll see is that we get undefined says hi. Okay. So what is going on here, right? This is what I'm talking about when I say that arrow functions cannot be used with a this context. Now, they can be used in general, and what they end up doing is they end up taking the parent context, which is a little bit of a confusing concept, but we'll try to explain this in more depth later. But for now, we're going to focus on the function keyword and objects and the scoping because that's the most important thing, and I'll try to mention this a little bit at the end of the video. Just be aware that there is no this binding with arrow functions. They actually use the this binding from the parent, which in this case is the global scope. So if I do this right here, and I do a console.log of the this keyword here, and I do a console.log of the this keyword here, and clear out my console here, what we'll see is that in our first call right here for line 13, we have a name of Alex, and this whole object is the this, right? And then when we're trying to access this dot name on line 5, that's right here. We have access to that. Name is Alex, right? But when I try to do arrow greet, right, you can see that I get this kind of object right here, right? And like what is this object? Well, there's like nothing in here, right? It's empty, right? And of course, an empty object dot name is undefined, right? This has no properties inside of it, right? There's nothing in here. So that is why you can't use arrow functions, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But for now, as long as this concept here with the function makes sense, that is probably the most important part. To be quite honest, I think the easiest thing to really get a hold of this concept as you're practicing this, and we'll see a bit more of this with the exercises later, is to actually do this kind of thing right here, right? Where we're actually console logging this value to make sure we know what it is, just so that we get a general intuition for what's happening behind the scenes. It's just an object, and it can get bound to different things, in this case, the thing to the left of the dot, as long as it's not an arrow function. Okay, let's keep going. Oof, that was a lot. Now, so let's take a look at this example. This one is a bit trickier, and I want to kind of show you what happens when we still have a regular function, but we're trying to log to this value, and it doesn't seem to work as we'd expect. So the difference between this one and the previous one is, let's just go through this upper part again first. So we have the Alex object, same as before, and name is Alex, so that's a property, right? It's just a string. Then we have this friend property, and friend is a nested object inside of the Alex object. All right. And the friend object has a greet property inside of it, which is actually a regular function. And it's going to console log this.name says hi. Okay. So this is different, right? But it seems like it probably is still going to work, right? Because like this value, right? But again, remember, this value is not actually defined when we're creating this object. It's dynamic. It only gets bound when we actually call this function like so down here. So when we call it like this, we have to call it, or one way to call it actually is using alex.friend. So Alex is here, .friend is here, and then .greet is inside of there, right? And it's a function, so we can call it. But what's curious about this is that if we run this, we will get undefined says hi. All right, so why is that the case? Well, if we use the rule that the thing to the left of the dot becomes the this, then this becomes much more clear, right? I can't stop laughing, I'm very sorry. So in this case, when we say alex.friend.greet, right? The friend is what becomes the this context for this greet method, right? So if it's the friend that's the this, well, this is friend right here. If I don't move friend, right? This is friend right here, right? Does friend have a name property? No, right? It only has a greet property. There is no name property on friend, right? Only Alex has a name property. Friend does not have a name property. Friend only has a greet property. So when it's basically like trying to do friend.name is what this is going to be, but there is no name. There's only a greet. So that's why we get undefined, because we're trying to do friend.name, which doesn't exist, which is undefined. All right, so let's take a look at this in practice. So if I come in here and I add a new friend key to my object of Alex, and I'm just going to kind of copy this greet function right here, because we're going to do the exact same thing, and I'm going to put it in here. Okay, so literally copied and paste from out in the Alex object to inside the friend object. Okay, I'm going to comment these out for now because we've already seen that before. And in order to actually call the friend greet method, we have to do alex.friend.greet, right? So I'm going to clear my console. I'm going to run Alex again, and we're going to see that we get undefined says hi. And since we're also logging the this value here, what we're going to see is that this is the this value. It's an object with just the greet key inside of it. There is no name key. So of course, if we try to do this.name, it's going to be undefined, right? Just like this.anything else that's not greet. Okay. So hopefully that makes sense. And the reason for this is that friend is the thing to the left of the greet, right? We're doing friend.greet basically. Okay. Even though Alex is all the way over here and Alex has a name, right? It doesn't matter because the this is going to bind to the friend, not to Alex. Okay. So what happens if we put a name property on friend? Let's try that. So inside of here, I'm going to say a name property, and I'm going to put Alex's friend. Okay, I'm going to put a comma here. Right? So now friend has a name property. Let's try to run this. And there you go, right? We'll see that now it works, right? Because now we have added to this object, which is the this object for the greet function in this case, the name property of Alex's friend, and we get Alex's friend says hi. And we can see that this is the new this value, which didn't exist before. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. Cool. Let's keep going with this. So this is what we just did, right? So just as a recap, kind of in visual format, if we had Alex and Alex is here and we had a friend, and in this case, Alex's friend is Priya, we have greet, this.name says hi. The context for this changes because we're using alex.friend.greet and we get Priya says hi because friend is going to be the context for the greet function, which is this entire object right here is going to be the context for this function, and it's going to be bound to this box basically for that function call. So the this inside of this function is going to refer to friend, okay, where the name exists and the name is Priya. Okay, cool. Now, what I want to show you next is how we can use these concepts to actually manipulate the this value. There are 3 keywords that are meant to be used exclusively with this idea so that we can actually change what the this value is manually, very, very easily. Okay, these 3 keywords are often kind of strike fear into a lot of newer developers, but I hope to kind of clear that up because really at the end of the day, they're actually not complicated at all once you actually understand the hard part, which is what we just went through right now. So with the context of this in mind, let's go to look at these 3 functions, which are called call, apply, and bind before we look at the last part, which is new keyword. So let's take a look at this. I've added a bit of extra stuff on here just so that we can learn a little bit more as we go throughout this video together. So let's take a look at our object. So we have Alex, which is an object, right? Alex has a name property, which is Alex. Alex has a friend property, which is an object. Now the friend property inside of Alex is just like we had on the previous slide, right? We have a name of Priya, we have a greet, which is a function. This might look a little bit funky if you haven't seen this before. I'm using the spread operator inside the function arguments to actually allow myself to pass in multiple arguments without actually knowing what they are beforehand. If you haven't seen the spread operator before, I have a video on that on the channel, but I didn't actually go over it in the context of a function, but it effectively works the same way as it would outside of the function context with like arrays and objects and things like that. So we'll see how this works in a second. This is not the important part of this example, so if you're kind of looking at that and scratching your head, don't worry too much, just bear with me for now. So inside of here, we can provide different arguments. And what I'm doing here is I'm console logging those arguments, whatever those happen to be. But the interesting part of this is what we had before, right? Console.log this.name says hi. Okay, so again, we do not know what this.name is, right? It is not Priya at the point of creating Alex. It's not Priya and it's not Alex, right? Because it doesn't exist yet. This has not been bound yet. So we can't say with certainty that it's Priya or that it's Alex. And we'll see why in a second. We can manipulate the this value at call time, just like we can when we change, like that's the reason why it's called a dynamic this, right? Because we don't know what it's going to be until we actually call this method. So that's where the call method comes in, and we can use .call on any function in JavaScript. Okay, this is a property that exists on the prototype that we can actually use for every single function in JavaScript that comes built in for us, very similar to arrays having maps and objects having has own property and all that kind of stuff. Okay, so in this case, let's take a look at what happens here. We can say alex.friend.greet.call. So greet.call. Be careful that there's no brackets. We're not actually calling greet using regular parentheses, right? We're going to be using this call method to do the calling of the parentheses for us. Okay, so this call method or function is going to actually put the parentheses on for us inside of it later on. Okay, but what the interesting thing about the call method is for functions is we can manipulate the this value. So the first argument to call is literally the this context for that function call. So for example, if I say a name object or an object with a property of name of Mia in this case, right? The context for this function here is not going to be friend anymore, like we had on the previous example, right? We're not going to use the thing before the dot. We're going to be using whatever we give the call function, which in this case is an object with a name property of Mia. So when we come in here to console.log out this.name, well, this is going to be this purple object, Mia, not the friend object. So we're actually going to get Mia says hi. We're not going to get Priya says hi, okay? Because we're manually manipulating the this value dynamically when we call the function. So we can also optionally provide the call method arguments. So if our function took arguments, we can actually provide them inside of this argument list. In fact, the only difference between call and apply, which we'll see in a second, is the way that this second argument works. The first argument works the same way. The concept also works the exact same way. So if I log out those args, right, we'll see 1, 2, 3 as an array like this because we pass in 1, 2, 3, which is a comma separated list of arguments. Okay, and these would get slotted in technically in order if we didn't have it set up with a spread operator. So if this function took like an A and B and a C, we would probably get 1, 2, and 3 inside of there, for example. But the important part of this is the this value. The this in this example is going to bind to this purple object in these two cases, which is going to be an object with a name property of Mia. It's not going to bind to the friend, which is what is to the left of the greet. So the rule of the this being the thing to the left of the greet is true almost all the time, unless you see things like call, apply, or bind being applied, which we'll see next. Okay, so let's actually code this out really quick to see what this looks like. So I'm just going to create a new file here, and I'm going to call this call.js. I'm going to kind of copy my Alex object. I'm just going to move it over. And I am then going to create a call to this Alex object, just so that we have a separate file to make it a bit cleaner. So let's see, we have our greet function, we have our arrow greet, which we know doesn't work, and then we have our friend function, or sorry, a friend object, which has the properties name and greet in it, which greet is a function. Okay, so let's try something interesting. So let's do alex.greet. So if you recall, alex.greet is going to be this function right here, and since we're not doing any funky stuff with call, apply, or bind, and this is a function here, we can actually say that the thing to the left of the dot is going to be the this value, right? So if I say node call.js, I'm going to get Alex as the this value, which makes sense, right? Let's do the same thing really quick, just as a recap with friend, alex.friend.greet, and we're going to get the Alex's friend in this case instead of Priya as the this value, right? So that makes sense. Now check this out. I'm just going to put a console.log here just so that we can kind of separate this out so it doesn't get too messy in the console, but I want to leave these up as well. If I say alex.greet.call, right? And I call this greet function with a different object for the this value, it's going to behave differently. So if I gave it a name of, let's just say Iron Man, right? And I try to run this, we're going to get, let's see right here, Iron Man says hi. Okay. And the most important thing to keep note of here is that the this value, which we're logging out on line 4, right, is just the name Iron Man, and Iron Man says hi, right? I can give Iron Man a like an age. Let's say, I don't know how old Iron Man is. Let's just say 40. Sorry, Tony, if you're younger or older, I'm not actually sure. But you can see that that is the actual object that actually gets passed in to the this value. Okay, we are not using Alex anymore, which is normally what we'd be using in the context of line 20. We can do the same thing with the friend. So we can say alex.friend.greet.call, right? And I can give it a similar object. So I'll just copy this over here for name. Let's just say, I don't know, Wonder Woman. And I don't know, let's just also go with, let's just say Wonder Woman is 45, right? For example, not actually sure. So if I run this, what you'll see is that the this value for both of these calls are different, right? So Iron Man for the this value here, Wonder Woman for the this value here, and we are overriding the default this values, which are friend and Alex, depending on which one we're actually calling. Right, Alex over here to the left and alex.friend to the left for the second call. So we can manipulate the this value using call. Now, just to show you kind of how the arguments things work, just for sake of kind of fun, I guess, if I put args in here and I also console.log out the args, what you can see is if I pass out a bunch of arguments to this, like let's say it took like hello, and then it took like, I don't know, like a 4 or something, right? What we could see is that those would actually get logged out in an array. If I put this in the wrong place, this is for this one right here. So you can see that it got ignored here because I didn't actually have args for my greet up here. I only had args for my greet inside friend. So it was not being applied for the Iron Man case, just the Wonder Woman case. And you can see if I do that in here, I get hello and 4 being printed out, right? Which are the arguments being passed into this function. So just if the function takes arguments, right, that's what they would end up being. So this is very similar to if I had like an A and a B, right? I could have a console.log, the first argument, the second argument, and if I run this, what you'll see is those arguments basically destructured out into those values. Okay, let's keep going with this. So I want to show you apply next. And if you look at this, if I click between these two slides, there's pretty much no difference, right? There is literally no difference between apply and call apart from this little detail right here. If you don't like passing in all of the arguments as a comma separated value list like this, and you want to pass them in all as a single argument, but as in an array, then you can do that with apply. That's literally the only difference, right? So everything else works the exact same way. It still binds to this value using the first argument to the function. You don't have to provide the second value if you don't want to, unless it has arguments you want it to use. But apply works the exact same way. Okay, it just has a second parameter. So for example, I could actually do this the same way. In fact, if I just do apply here, let's take a look at what happens. So we'll see that for apply, it doesn't actually have a third argument here. So we don't actually, or I guess it does, it's just something else. So if I just get rid of that one right there and I just do apply like this, oh my goodness, we get, this one is also not happy with that one right there. So let me do that one there. Still not happy. I just want to show you apply without going too crazy. Create lists from array-like on a non-object. Oh, it's getting confused of this. This has to be in an array. I didn't follow my own advice. There you go. I'm pretty sure that's going to fix it, right? So you can say that we get hello and undefined over here because B was not passed in because we only passed in one argument over here. And for, where is it? We only did this for A and B. So if we did A and B here, console.log A and B, and we have an A and a B over here, for example, what we'll see is the exact same thing, hello and undefined, for Iron Man, right? So hopefully that makes sense. And I guess you can see over here, actually, I even forgot to put apply for this one. I'm still using call. So you can see that with call, it's literally going to give that as the argument, right? So there is no B argument. So in this case, this is probably a good example. I didn't even mean to show you this. There is no second argument for B, right? We're only giving it an array with a value of hello for call. So if I give it like, 100 for B, you can see that now we're going to get hello and 100 if I run this one more time. So then I get hello and 100 because this gets slotted into A, this gets slotted into B. But for apply, everything needs to be inside an array. So the equivalent for the apply would be that. Okay, so these two here are functionally the same. And I'll show you that by actually running this. You can see that these are the exact same. Actually, not really the same because I have to get rid of this being an array. But there you go, right? So that's the only difference between call and apply. Sorry for the confusion there. It's probably good for you to see me mess this up a little bit. So I'll leave that in there because really at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter which one you use. If you're more comfortable using this syntax for apply, where you want to pass everything in as one big array, or if you want to kind of pass it in as separate comma separated values, this is mainly for historical reasons to make one version easier than the other, depending on the structure of your arguments. But for today we have spread syntax and all that kind of stuff, so we can really do either or. Okay, so that is how apply and call work. Really, really important. You'll see them usually inside like framework code or library code, or you can even use it yourself in more advanced cases. The most important takeaway, right, is that this keyword gets bound differently depending on the context that it's being called from, and we would never know that until we actually run and execute that method in the code. So when we simply create an object like this and we try to use this inside of it, it's literally impossible to know what this is going to be because we can provide any value for this with apply, for example, or with call. Okay, I want to show you one more thing over here, which is the bind keyword. So this is one final way that we can actually change what this keyword points to. So let's see how this one works. I simplified this example a little bit since I want to focus on what bind actually does, because you will see this and it definitely is quite scary when you first see it if you're not sure what's happening. So let's say that we have an Alex object again, name of Alex. We have a nested friend object, name of Priya, greet, which is a function, console log this.name says hi. Again, hopefully now I've hammered it in. We don't know what this is yet. We're only going to know this when we actually call greet later on. So what we can do is we can actually say this. Let's focus on the right-hand side here. We can say alex.friend.greet. So we're grabbing the greet function and we're binding it to a new this keyword. Okay, so instead of calling it and applying it like we saw over here, right? This only happens for that single function call. A bind makes it permanent and gives us back a new function. It doesn't actually alter this one unless we do something specific. It gives us back a new function that we can use where it's permanently been changed for the this keyword. So if we call bound greet here, we're going to see that Mia has already been permanently stuck or bound to the this keyword for greet because of what bind does. So I'm going to come back to VS Code here. I'm just going to copy my Alex object again, and I'll create a bind.js file. I'll paste in Alex, And let's see if we can bind this greet function, for example, right here. Okay, so I'm going to say const bound greet is equal to alex.greet.bind, and I want to bind it to a new object, right? So I'm just going to go with, let's just say, let's just go with name of Iron Man. All right, let's console.log out bound greet and see what we get. So I'm going to run node and I'm going to run bind.js, and you can see that we have a function that's called bound greet. So we get back a function from bind. And if we call that function just like this, right, what you'll see is that this value inside of it is going to be that bound this value, which we passed to bind. So this value is Iron Man, undefined because of the A and the B. So I could actually pass in hello and there, for example, and then we would get different values for the A and the B. But the Iron Man here is the important part. We are not having it bind to Alex, which should be the default. We are forcibly binding it to Iron Man. Right? So if I call this multiple times, right? Let's do 3 times here. It's stuck. It's not been changed, right? It's stuck to be Iron Man as the name because that's what we set the binding to right here. So we're permanently binding to this value. Now, what's interesting here, right, is let me get rid of these two. We can actually reassign this back to the original value. So for example, I can say something like this. I'll just mess with this one, for example, in here. I can say alex.friend.greet is equal to alex.friend.greet.bind, and I'm going to bind it to Iron Man. Okay. So what I'm saying is reassign this function here to be the bound version, which is bound to this value permanently. All right, so check this out. Now if I say alex.friend.greet and I call it, let's see what we get. I'm gonna get rid of this bound greet here and this console log here, just so we can focus on this last few logs. So what we'll see here is we actually get Iron Man, right? And I guess I can call this with like a 1 and a 2, for example, just to make it a bit different. And we'll get the 1 and the 2. But the important part here is that we're getting Iron Man, right? Even though friend is the thing to the left of the greet, very similar to call and apply, we bound it to this value. I know I'm hammering this home because this is so important to be Iron Man. And now whenever we call greet, it's stuck to this, which is this value right here. It's no longer context dependent. It's only going to be stuck to this object unless we change it again later. Okay, cool. So to kind of wrap this up, I do want to show you one last thing, which I teased at the previous prototype video as well. And that's this new keyword. I mentioned at the beginning of this video, when we looked at this kind of method right here, where we're adding things to the prototype, that this is not best practice. We don't want to be changing the prototype around to kind of accidentally clobber the keys on there or add our own keys and kind of mess up the namespace, as it's called, of the object prototype or the array prototype or whatever. So we usually want to create new objects that are our own names. And this is really kind of the concept of classes as well. But check this out. What we can do is over here, I have a function called hero. And this hero is just a regular function, right? Just using the function keyword, but not the arrow functions, right? Because we can't have this in an arrow function, or we can, but it refers to something that is not bound to this context. So in here, I'm saying this.name is equal to name. And I'm saying this.greet is equal to a function where I'm doing this console logging, which we saw before. Now, this is a little bit weird, right? Because now this is not an object, right? And we're saying this.name is equal to name in a function. So what on earth does that mean, right? What is this, right? Okay, so that's kind of odd. And this function is not returning anything either, right? It's just doing this weird stuff here, and then it's not returning it. It's returning undefined, right? So that's kind of strange. So let's look at what happens. So if I'm going to call storm, a variable called storm, I'm going to use this new keyword. This is really the key right here, this new keyword. I'm going to say const storm is equal to a new hero. I'm going to give it that argument of a string in this case, which is going to get assigned to name, which is then going to get assigned to this.name. And if I do storm.greet, check this out. I'm going to get this hero looking object thing with a name property and a greet property. Now notice that this is not an object by default. Like it's not the default object, I should say. It's a hero object, whatever that is. Like we just made that up, right? That doesn't exist in JavaScript. Hero definitely doesn't exist in JavaScript, right? We just made that up ourselves. But we have this hero object, which is cool. And then it says storm says hi, which is exactly what we want. So for some reason, this new thing seems to magically make this keyword work, basically, inside of regular functions, okay? I can even use the previous examples that we saw before. I can use call. I can give it a different this value, for example, Wolverine as a name, and then it will actually give us back a Wolverine as a name and the object was still as a hero object with a greet function as well as a Wolverine says hi. Okay, so that is pretty cool. Let's check this out really quick as a last thing for this video, because this is really going to be the precursor for how object-oriented programming in JavaScript works, where we're actually technically using prototypes behind the scenes, but to simulate object-oriented behavior using classes. All right, so in here, I'm just going to call this new.js. And I'm going to basically copy this, right? So I'm going to say function hero is going to take a name. And inside of here, I'm going to say this dot name is equal to the name. I'm going to say this dot greet. And this is going to be a function, right? So we can't have a regular arrow function in here. It's going to perform differently. I'm going to console log this value. And I'm going to console.log, let's just say, let's go there. Example so far, this dot name says awesome, right? Okay, so let's see what happens really quick if I try to do this. I'm going to say const storm is equal to a hero, and I'm going to give hero of storm. Okay, so I want you to think about this, right? Based on what you know about functions, right? Notice I'm not using this crazy new funky keyword new here. This is just regular vanilla JavaScript functions, right? What am I going to get for storm if I try to log out storm? All right, let's take a look. So I'm going to run node, I'm going to run new.js, and undefined. So hopefully you're saying, I knew it, I told you so, right? A regular function in JavaScript we've seen before returns undefined, right? If we're not returning anything by default, it's going to return undefined. Right? So for example, if I returned hi, then I would just get hi. This is just regular functions, right? We're not returning anything, so we get return of undefined. But check this out. If all I do is I add the new keyword in here, now magically, JavaScript is going to hook up a bunch of crazy stuff for us behind the scenes. Let's check this out. Wow. Okay. So in this case, when I'm logging storm out now, just because I use a new keyword, I'm not even returning anything, right? I am getting back a hero object with a name of storm and a greet function in there. That's pretty cool. So what if I do storm.greet, right? Let's take a look at that. What's going to happen? Okay, so we're logging out this object again, which makes kind of sense, right? Because it's storm.greet. Right? Because it's the thing before the dot. So that kind of checks out with the rest of the stuff that we learned. And then we get storm says awesome. So this dot name is storm dot name, which is, we saw right here is this object, right? So the dot name property is storm, and we get storm says awesome. So that's pretty cool. So what seems to be happening is that when we use the new keyword, you can think of JavaScript as effectively constructing an object behind the scenes and then hooking up prototypes and things like that and bindings for us automatically. Okay, the class syntax kind of automates some of this stuff and makes it even more powerful so that we don't have to do a lot of this stuff manually ourselves. So I want to show you something really cool, but really quick, I want to show you this first. I want to say storm.greet.call. I'm going to give it a different object. I'll go with what I had before, right? I'm going to give it a name of, let's just say, I don't know, cyborg, right? What we'll see is that we can treat it just like any other this value, right? It's going to change if we change what the this value is, right? So in this case, we're getting cyborg as the this value for name, and then cyborg says awesome. So that's the same as what we saw before. Now I'm just going to put a console.log in here, and I'm going to put a bunch of dashes just so that we can really see what this looks like below the cyborg stuff. To really hammer this point home and to show you that prototypes are at real heavy work here behind the scenes, I want to show you something super cool. I want to console.log out the object.getOwnPropertyNames of Storm. So if I do this, I'm going to get that Storm has a name and a greets property. And if I look at Storm and then I look at storm.__proto, let's take a look at what's on there. We see that there's a constructor. That's weird, right? What is this constructor? So check this out. I'm going to console.log out storm.__proto.constructor, and I know that the constructor has a name property on it and that it's an object. So I'm going to log out the name property. Okay. So when we do that, we'll see that we get hero. So what is that? Well, that's the name of this function, right? That's the type of object that we're creating. So that's cool. Well, let's take a look at what the prototype is. So if I say .proto and then .__proto again, I'm going to ask for what's the hero's prototype's name, right? And if I try to log this out, check that out, right? The prototype for hero is the object prototype, right? And if I try to console.log out the storm.__proto.proto and then that proto, we know that the prototype of the object in JavaScript should be null. And it is, right? So what we have is we have hero, which inherits from object, which inherits from the null prototype, right? So that is super awesome. So we can effectively say that this new keyword sets up the this value object for us and also sets up this new fancy prototype for us and hooks up this constructor for us as well. And we're going to see this come up again. In fact, this exact thing when we actually start to take a look at classes, because what we've effectively done is created our own custom object, and we can create instances of those objects, and we can even create further instances and set the prototypes of those other instances to be the hero object, for example. And what we've effectively recreated is our own type of object-oriented programming with inheritance, at least. Okay. And with the nature of how prototypes work, where we look up into the parents for different names and properties, there are a lot of things like methods and overriding and things like that that we can actually take a look at as well. So those are super fun concepts. I can't wait to get to those in the classes video. And this is pretty central to actually getting to understand what classes really do for us and how they work behind the scenes still as prototypes. But what I'd like to get to is a bunch of exercises on this in the next video. So if you did appreciate and like this video, minus all my goofs and punniness, I'd love it if you could like the video and subscribe to the channel. I'd love to hear in the comments, did this really help you at all? Is this kind of something that you already knew? Were you confused about this keyword? Have you tried to use it in different ways where you've gotten different errors? I'd love to see examples of errors that you've gotten, and maybe even how you've used this new knowledge to try and fix those errors now that you've seen how that might actually work with the this binding. And what we're going to do in the next video is look at a bunch of exercises to actually get more practice with the this keyword specifically, which is going to set us up really, really nicely for when we get to object-oriented programming, starting with the basics and introduction to how classes work in JavaScript and the basic concepts of object-oriented programming in essence of itself in general. So I can't wait to get to the exercises and then the OOP topics right after that. I'll see you in those videos. See you later.